You spent years defending someone who was already showing you exactly who they were. Not the version you imagined at 3 in the morning, rehearsing the explanation that would finally make sense of them. The version standing right in front of you, in the pattern that never changed no matter how many chances you gave it. You call it love. You call it loyalty. You call it patience. Jung called it something else. Projection, the habit of taking what you need to be true and painting it onto another person's face until you can't tell the paint from the skin anymore. It happens with a spouse of decades. It happens with a grown child, a sibling, a friend, a boss you defended long after they stopped deserving it. Different relationship, same quiet act of painting over what was already in plain sight. And here is the sentence you need before anything else in this video. You don't get clarity by trusting people more. You get clarity by trusting your own eyes more than your own hope. That single shift, eyes over hope, is the entire difference between a person who keeps getting blindsided by the same kind of person over and over and a person who finally sees straight. Not colder. Not harder. Just straight. This is not a video about giving up on people. It's a video about giving up on the version of them you built to avoid a truth you already knew. Carl Jung spent a career studying how the mind protects itself from what it doesn't want to know, and one of its favorite tools is projection, taking a quality you need to see in someone, good or bad, and placing it onto them whether it's actually there or not. You do this with the people you love the most, which is exactly why it's so hard to catch. You take the parent who never really apologized for the years that hurt you, and you project the version who would apologize, if you just waited long enough or asked the right way or forgave enough in advance. You take the partner who checks out the moment a conversation gets hard, and you project the partner who would show up, if you just explained it one more time in one more way on one more night. You take the friend who only calls when they need something, and you project the friend who would reciprocate, if life just settled down for them if they just had a little more time. This isn't stupidity and it isn't weakness. It's protection. Because admitting who someone actually is often means admitting a loss. The marriage you thought you had, the parent you thought raised you, the friendship you thought was mutual. And the mind, given the choice, will choose a comfortable illusion over an uncomfortable truth almost every single time, unless you deliberately train it not to. This isn't a flaw unique to you, or a sign of weakness in your particular character. Jung considered it one of the most consistent patterns across every psyche he studied. The unconscious will produce almost any story before it will sit with an unbearable one. The story doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be believable enough for long enough to postpone the reckoning one more day. And postponement feels, in the moment, exactly like patience. That's what makes it so hard to catch from the inside. The defense mechanism wears the same clothes as the virtue. Picture the version of this you already know because you do. 22 years of marriage, and somewhere around year 8 he stopped really listening. Not dramatically, no explosion, no confession, no single moment you could point to and say, that's when it changed. He just started nodding at the right beats in the conversation while thinking about something else entirely. And you noticed. You noticed, and then you did what most people do with a noticing they can't afford yet. You built a story that made it bearable. He's just stressed with work. He shows love differently than I do. He's not a talker, that's just who he is. Every one of those sentences may contain a grain of truth. But you weren't using them to understand him. You were using them to avoid seeing him because seeing him clearly meant seeing the distance too. That's the mechanism Jung pointed to. You don't see the actual person in front of you, you see the composite. The blend of memory, hope, and need that you've layered over him like a second face, painted stroke by stroke over years. The real face is still there underneath. You just haven't been looking at it directly because looking directly means admitting something changed, and you didn't choose it and nobody asked your permission. The same mechanism shows up with a grown son who calls only when he needs money, and you tell yourself he's just bad at keeping in touch. It shows up with a daughter who criticizes every decision you make and calls it just being honest, and you tell yourself she cares enough to say the hard thing. It shows up after retirement, when the friend who always had time for coffee stops returning texts, and you tell yourself everyone gets busier as they age. In every version, you fill in the part you don't want to face with the part you wish were there instead. And the gap between the two, between the person you've built in your head and the person who keeps actually showing up, that gap does not close on its own. It grows. Every unaddressed moment adds one more brushstroke to the painting, until the painting has almost nothing left to do with the person it was supposed to represent. It shows up, too, in the parent who is gone now, where memory quietly does the same work grief always does, smoothing the hard years into something gentler than they actually were, because a difficult relationship is easier to carry once it's been softly repainted. You're allowed to grieve someone and still be honest about who they were. Those two things are not opposites, even though it can feel disloyal to hold them at the same time. It shows up in the job you finally left, too, the one where a boss you defended to everyone else for years turned out, in hindsight, to have shown you exactly who they were in the very first month. You called it a tough but fair management style for a long time, because admitting it was something else meant admitting you'd spent years somewhere that was quietly costing you. None of these examples are really about a spouse, a boss, or a parent specifically. They're about the same mechanism wearing different clothes. A mind that would rather rewrite the evidence than rewrite the story it's already committed to believing. And the longer the story runs uncorrected, the more expensive the correction becomes later, because by then you're not just updating an opinion, you're grieving years you spent defending something that never needed your defense in the first place. So here's the question that should sit uncomfortably in your chest right now, and you don't have to answer it out loud. How much of the person you love, or loved, or worked for, or married, or raised, is actually them, and how much of it is you, refusing to update a picture you painted years ago? Here's what makes this so hard to break, and why willpower alone never fixes it. Admitting who someone really is doesn't just cost you an illusion. It costs you a whole future you had already built around them, brick by brick, without ever writing the blueprint down. If your husband really doesn't listen, that's not a small correction to make at dinner. That's decades reframed, a marriage reread from a different angle. If your daughter really doesn't respect you, that's not one bad conversation to move past. That's a relationship you now have to relate to differently for the rest of your life. So the mind does something clever and quietly cruel. Instead of grieving that loss all at once, it delays it, one excuse at a time, spreading the pain out so thin you barely feel any single dose. She's going through a lot right now. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. That's just how his generation communicates. She'll come around once things settle down. Every excuse is a small anesthetic. It doesn't heal anything. It just numbs the moment long enough for you to stay in the relationship one more day without collapsing under the weight of what you actually saw. And Jung would say this is the shadow at work too. Not just in them but in you, the part of yourself you refuse to look at directly. In this case, the shadow isn't some dark secret. It's your own willingness to accept less than you deserve, because facing that fact is more painful in the moment than facing their behavior. You're not just protecting them from your judgment. You're protecting yourself from admitting that you saw it clearly and chose to stay anyway. That's the real wound underneath all the excuses, not "they hurt me," but "I let it happen again and again and I called it love because the alternative was calling it something I couldn't live with yet." If this is landing somewhere specific right now, a name, a face, a particular afternoon you keep quietly replaying, that's not an accident. That's this video doing exactly what it was built to do, and it's worth sitting with instead of scrolling past it to feel better in the next 10 seconds. Because the next part of this is where it either turns into real insight, or it turns into one more thing you understood intellectually and changed absolutely nothing about. So if excuses are the anesthetic, what's the antidote? It's simpler than most therapy language makes it sound, and considerably harder than it looks on paper. Behavior is the only language that doesn't lie. Words can be planned in advance. Intentions can be completely sincere in the moment and still never once translate into action. But a pattern, something repeated 10 times, 20 times across years, that's not an accident of circumstance anymore. That's information freely given whether or not you were ready to read it. If someone tells you they respect you, and then interrupts you in every single conversation you have, the interruption is the truth and the sentence is decoration. If someone says they'll change, and the change lasts exactly as long as the argument that provoked it, the relapse is the truth and the apology is decoration. You already knew this somewhere underneath the hope. You clocked the pattern the third time it happened. Maybe even the first. You just decided the words were more trustworthy than the behavior because the words were easier to live with than what the behavior was actually telling you. Think of the toxic workplace again, the one you finally left after years of telling yourself the environment would improve once the right project ended, once the right person got promoted, once things settled down. The words from leadership were always reassuring. The actual behavior, the missed raises, the credit quietly taken, the culture that never once changed no matter who was hired or fired, that behavior had been telling you the truth since roughly month 3. You didn't leave when you learned the truth. You left when you finally allowed yourself to believe it. That gap between learning and believing is where most people spend the majority of a difficult relationship, a difficult job, or a difficult family dynamic. Closing that gap is not about gathering more evidence. You already have more than enough evidence. It's about finally letting the evidence outrank the story. Jung wasn't writing about relationships specifically when he described integration, bringing the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind into alignment, but the principle applies here with almost uncomfortable precision. Integration means letting what you see and what you believe finally match, instead of running as two separate, contradictory operating systems. Right now, for most people watching this, those two things are living in separate rooms of the same house. The eyes see one thing. The story tells another. And the exhaustion so many people carry into their 50s, 60s, and 70s isn't from the relationship itself. It's from holding two contradictory realities open at the same time, every single day for years without ever admitting the cost of doing it. But if the action already showed you the truth, why did you keep choosing yourself last just to stay a little longer? Here's the part almost nobody says out loud because it reframes the whole story. Every time you ignore what you already saw, you're not just being deceived by them. You are choosing to deceive yourself one more time before they even get the chance to do it again. That's a hard sentence. Read it again anyway. Self-betrayal doesn't look dramatic from the inside, which is exactly why it's so easy to keep doing for decades without noticing. It looks like small, entirely reasonable-sounding decisions. Staying quiet instead of naming what you noticed, picking up the phone instead of letting it ring through to voicemail, saying, "It's fine," out loud while something in your chest is saying the opposite in real time. Each one of those moments feels minor, almost too small to matter. But minor moments compound like interest, silently, in the background of a life. 10 years of minor self-betrayals doesn't add up to a minor cost. It adds up to a person who has forgotten what her own instincts even sound like, because they've been overridden so consistently for so long, that the volume got turned all the way down. This is where retirement, the empty house after the kids finally move out, the parent who is gone now, the job you finally walked away from, this is where all of it converges into one loud, unavoidable room. Because in the busy years, you could distract yourself from the gap between what you saw and what you actually said out loud. There was always a schedule to hide inside, a task, a role, a next thing to get through. Now there's quiet. And in the quiet, the gap between seeing and saying doesn't disappear. It gets louder because nothing is left to compete with it for your attention anymore. That's not decline, and it's not you falling apart at exactly the wrong time in your life. That's your own clarity finally getting the chance to speak without decades of noise standing in front of the microphone. Jung had a specific word for the part of you that keeps overriding your own instincts to preserve an old identity. The persona, the social mask built to keep relationships running smoothly, even at your own expense. For decades, your persona might have been the understanding one, the one who doesn't make a fuss, the one who holds the family together. That mask served a purpose once. It kept the peace, kept the marriage functioning, kept the family gathering at the same table every holiday. But a mask you can never take off stops being a mask and starts being a cage, and the quiet you're sitting in now is often the first moment in years you've had enough stillness to feel the edges of it. So what does it actually cost, all totaled, to keep the illusion running for as long as most people run it? More than almost anyone tallies while they're still inside it. It costs you the years you spent managing someone else's behavior instead of building your own life on your own terms. It costs you the version of yourself who once trusted her own read on people completely, the one who used to say, "Something feels off," and mean it before you slowly trained yourself to override that voice for the sake of a piece that was never real to begin with. It costs you real relationships too, quietly, on the side, because the energy you spend maintaining a fictional version of one person is energy you don't have left over for the people who never once asked you to pretend anything. And underneath all of it, it costs you time, the one resource nobody at this stage of life is under the illusion they have an unlimited supply of anymore. Every year you spend waiting for someone to become the person you already decided deep down they aren't going to become, is a year you didn't spend actually living around who they really are. Good, bad, complicated, mixed, human. You give time to people who have already told you, through action, exactly how they intend to spend it. You give trust to patterns you've already watched repeat. You give silence to moments that were asking you to finally speak. None of that is generosity. It's a slow, quiet withdrawal from your own life, made in small enough increments that you never quite notice the balance until it's nearly empty. This is the part where the old story usually starts to break on its own, whether you plan for it or not. Not because you decide to leave or confront or explain yourself one final time. Those are separate choices entirely, and none of them are required here or even the point. It breaks simply because you finally stop being able to unsee what you have already undeniably seen. It usually isn't the big betrayal that finally does it. It's something small, almost embarrassingly small when you try to describe it to someone else afterward. A comment at dinner. A missed call on the one day it actually mattered. A sentence you've heard 100 times before, except this time, for no clear reason, you actually hear it. And in that exact moment, the composite you spent years building, the kinder version, the more attentive version, the version who was just going through something temporary, that composite doesn't argue back. It doesn't put up a fight. It just quietly, finally stops holding. The way a structure doesn't collapse all at once out of nowhere. It simply reaches the point where the load it's been carrying silently for years finally exceeds what it was ever built to hold. It might happen at a family dinner when someone repeats the same dismissive joke they've made for 15 years, and instead of laughing along, you just watch it land clearly for the first time. It might happen in an empty house, weeks into retirement, when there's finally nothing left to schedule around the noticing. It might happen holding a phone that didn't ring on a day it mattered, from someone who has never once in your memory called first. Different rooms. Different faces. Same exact mechanism finally reaching its limit. You're not devastated in that exact moment, not in the way you might expect. You're still. Because grief for an illusion doesn't sound like sobbing. It sounds like silence, the specific kind of silence where you finally stop constructing the next excuse before it's even been asked for. That silence is not a breakdown, whatever it might look like from the outside to people who don't understand what just happened inside you. It's the sound of your own perception finally being allowed to finish a sentence it has been trying patiently to say for years. Here is what almost nobody warns you about this exact moment. It does not feel like liberation right away, no matter what the self-help version of this story likes to promise. It feels like loss because it genuinely is a loss. The loss of a person who, in the exact form you needed them to be, never actually existed anywhere outside your own mind. But give it time, real time, not a weekend, and something else slowly starts to replace the grief. Clarity doesn't arrive as triumph, with fireworks and a clean sense of victory. It arrives as quiet, almost anticlimactic in how ordinary it feels once it's actually here. You stop rehearsing arguments in the shower, the ones you were always going to have and never actually had. You stop drafting the text message that explains, one more time, why they should finally understand you. You stop waiting for the apology that would have made the whole story finally make sense in retrospect. You start noticing behavior instead of narrating around it, softening it, translating it into something easier to carry. You start trusting the pattern instead of the promise because the pattern has never once lied to you. And this is not the same as becoming cold or bitter or done with people altogether. That's a different failure entirely, one that only dresses itself up as growth to feel more acceptable. This is Jung's individuation at its most practical, stripped of all the abstract language, becoming a separate, complete self, capable of relating to other people without needing them to be who you require them to be in order to feel safe. An individuated person can still love someone flawed, deeply and without reservation. They just no longer need to lie to themselves about the flaws in order to keep loving them. That's the whole difference in the end. Not less love. Less delusion living inside the love. It shows up in ordinary moments now, not dramatic ones. A daughter says something dismissive at dinner, and instead of translating it into something gentler, you simply notice it, name it privately to yourself, and decide how close you want to stand to that particular pattern going forward. A friend cancels for the 4th time, and instead of building a defense on their behalf before they've even asked for one, you quietly adjust how much you expect from that friendship without announcing it, without punishing them for it, without needing them to agree with your read. That's what lucidity actually looks like in practice. Not a speech. Not a confrontation. A quiet internal recalibration that nobody else even has to know happened. Go back to the very beginning of this video, to the sentence about defending someone who was already showing you exactly who they were. You weren't wrong to hope. Hope isn't the mistake here, and it never was. The mistake was letting hope outvote your own eyes, over and over, year after year, until you could barely remember what your own eyes had been quietly trying to tell you in the first place. You didn't lose the parent who would have finally apologized, the partner who would have finally listened, the friend who would have finally shown up when it counted. You never actually had them. You built them, out of love and out of fear in roughly equal measure, and you kept them alive in your mind far longer than the evidence in front of you ever supported. What you have now, if you let yourself keep it, is something steadier than any illusion ever was. You see the marriage as it actually is, not as it was supposed to become by now. You see the grown child as they actually are, not as the child you remember raising all those years ago. You see the friend, the sibling, the former boss, the parent, even the earlier version of yourself who stayed far too long, all of it finally without the paint over the top of it. That is not disillusionment in the bitter, cynical way the word usually gets used. It's the other definition, the older, more literal one. The removal of an illusion. Nothing more than that and nothing less. Not a punishment for anyone. Not proof that love was wasted. Just the picture, finally, matching the person standing in front of you. You stop performing hope for people who never asked for the performance. You stop translating silence into secret meaning. You stop editing memory to protect a version of someone that memory itself no longer believes. You start seeing. You start choosing with open eyes instead of hoping with closed ones. This doesn't mean every relationship in your life needs to end. Some will continue almost exactly as they were, except now you're standing in them honestly instead of hiding behind a version of the other person that made the standing easier. Some will change shape, quietly, as you stop supplying the effort that used to keep the illusion running on both sides. And some, a smaller number than you might fear right now, will need real distance. Not out of anger, but because clarity, once it arrives, doesn't allow you to keep unseeing what you've finally seen. Whichever one it turns out to be, for whichever person comes to mind while you're hearing this, the same rule applies. You are not required to keep painting. You are only required to finally look at what's already there. If this names something you've been quietly circling for a long time without ever having the word for it, put Clarissa in the comments. Not to prove anything to anyone else watching, just to mark for yourself the moment you finally stopped painting over what you already knew.